All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children. And God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts: the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendis est. Shattering the Bigot label. Reclaim your rights and identity. Written by Conrad Riker. Available now. Links in description. The Sowari Trap. How your comfort became their power. I first encountered the phrase decolonial Sowari safety in a university HR handbook, nestled between reproductive justice and restorative practice in a glossary so dense with compound virtues that no dean would dare question any entry without risking a title bout with the Office of Institutional Equity. It sounded, at first hearing, like a tender thing, a promise that someone, somewhere, had finally decided to protect the vulnerable from the sharp edges of a world built without them in mind. 3 words, each carrying the warm hum of moral intention. Decolonial, a debt acknowledged. Sowari, something you say when you mean it. Safety, the thing every human being wants. Who could object? That is, of course, precisely the question the term is engineered to make impossible to ask. Strip the packaging, though, and the mechanism becomes visible. Decolonial Sowari safety means the most powerful person in the room gets to rewrite the rules of reality because they feel uncomfortable. And if you point out the facts, you are the one being aggressive. It is a portmanteau of sovereign and war, a weaponized status claimed by anyone whose identity category permits them to declare that their subjective emotional state overrides evidence, procedure, and the ordinary grammar of truth. The term does not describe safety. No guardrail, no foundation, no wall against harm. It describes a sovereign territory staked inside an institution where disagreement is recoded as violence and a factual correction becomes a punishable offense. The powerful person is not protected from danger. They are protected from being wrong, which is the most dangerous privilege any institution can grant. Here is the detonation point. If Sowari safety means no one can ever tell you that you are mistaken, then what you have demanded is not a safer room. It is a sealed cell where your errors echo back to you as affirmation, undisturbed by the friction of another mind. Every institution that enforces this standard does not protect the vulnerable. It manufactures a new clerical class whose authority depends entirely on the unreality of the claims it polices. The term sounds like compassion because it was designed to. But compassion that cannot survive a question is not compassion. It is a power grab wearing a tear. Lexicon entry. Decolonial Sowari safety. Noun phrase, bureaucratic status marker. The institutional mandate to prioritize the subjective emotional comfort of marginalized identities over objective biological reality or procedural fairness enforced through the threat of social or professional exile. Woke definition. A dynamic, context-dependent state of being where the structural violence of the dominant paradigm is suspended for those carrying intersectional trauma, ensuring that their lived experience is not invalidated by rigid patriarchal or colonial metrics of truth. Plain English, when the powerful person gets to rewrite the rules of reality because they feel uncomfortable, and if you point out the facts, you're the one being aggressive. Institutional function, to bypass due process and meritocracy by converting a policy preference, e.g. keeping a trans woman in the women's locker room or firing a man for tone, into a moral imperative. It shifts the burden of proof from the accuser to the accused, who must now prove their privilege or rigidity to be heard. Common uses. HR departments firing employees for microaggressions without clear definitions. Universities canceling speakers for violating the climate of the campus. Sports organizations allowing biological males to compete in women's events based on gender identity. Media narratives framing factual reporting on crime statistics as racist or misogynistic. Corporate DEI mandates requiring employees to adopt specific linguistic frameworks to show allyship. Questions that puncture it. If safety is defined by comfort, then who decides what is comfortable? If your experience is the only truth, how do we resolve conflicts between two people with different experiences? Is it safe to be wrong? If not, why do we punish those who are wrong more harshly than those who are merely uncomfortable? Does the label Sawari protect you from criticism, or does it protect you from growth? If a man is aggressive, is he aggressive because of his biology or because of his culture? If it's biology, is it oppressive? If it's culture, can it be changed? Encyclopedia notes. How your discomfort became their weapon, your silence became their evidence, and your job became their offering. Term, decolonial Sawari safety. Part of speech, noun phrase, bureaucratic status marker, political weapon, Kafka trap disguised as compassion. Definition, plain English. Decolonial Sawari safety is the institutional mandate to prioritize the subjective emotional comfort of anyone claiming a marginalized identity over objective reality, procedural fairness, biological fact, or rational discourse, enforced through the threat of professional destruction, social exile, or public shaming. It is the bureaucratic replacement for due process. It is feelings wearing a lab coat and carrying a gavel. Vok definition, translated from the original Newspeak. A dynamic, context-dependent praxis of liberatory care that suspends the structural violence of cis-heteropatriarchal white supremacist epistemology for bodies carrying intersectional trauma, ensuring that lived experience is not invalidated by colonial metrics of truth, logic, or evidence. Now let us translate this into honest English. When the right kind of person feels uncomfortable, reality is suspended, you are guilty until proven sensitive, and a microscope is considered an instrument of oppression. Satirical etymology. Decolonial, a ritual purification rite in which all concepts, methods, categories, and standards traceable to Western civilization, logic, biology, grammar, merit, time. The law of non-contradiction are declared tainted by original sin and replaced with the sovereign authority of grievance. The word performs a sleight of hand. It implies that reason itself is a colonial imposition, as if pre-colonial peoples had no use for evidence, categories, or cause and effect. The project is not decolonization. It is delogification, the severance of the mind from reality. Sawari, a portmanteau of sovereign, the individual's claimed absolute authority over the narrative governing their identity, and war, the perpetual ideological conflict between biological fact and social construction. It implies that safety is not a condition of the environment, but a weaponized status, a shield that functions as a sword. The Sawari individual is a walking sovereign state, unaccountable, unchallengeable, and armed. Safety, formerly meaning freedom from physical danger or bodily harm. Now meaning freedom from emotional discomfort, factual correction, philosophical disagreement, or the mild cognitive friction of encountering someone who disagrees with you. The word has undergone what linguists call semantic inflation, its meaning expanded so aggressively that it now includes the experience of hearing an opinion you dislike. When a word means everything, it means nothing. When safety includes both a roof over your head and no one disagreed with me in the meeting, the word has been stolen, hollowed out, and weaponized. The full phrase decolonial Sawari safety therefore means the sovereign right to wage war on reality itself enforced by institutional power under the camouflage of compassion. Common institutional use. Decolonial Sawari safety operates wherever bureaucracy has replaced conscience, wherever therapy has replaced theology, and wherever HR has replaced law. Its natural habitats include 1. Human Resources Departments. A male employee is terminated for microaggressions, a term with no stable definition, no falsifiability criteria, and no measurable threshold. He cannot defend himself because the charge is not an act, but an interpretation of an act filtered through the accuser's subjective emotional state. He is not accused of doing something wrong. He is accused of making someone feel a certain way. The feeling is the evidence. The accusation is the conviction. 2. Universities. A speaker is disinvited, shouted down, or physically blocked from campus because their presence constitutes violence, a word once reserved for acts causing bodily harm, now expanded to include the act of holding an opinion that contradicts campus orthodoxy. The university, historically the institution dedicated to the free pursuit of truth through rational debate, becomes its opposite, a space where certain questions cannot be asked, certain data cannot be cited, and certain arguments cannot be heard, because someone's sawari status declares them off limits. 3. Sports organizations. Biological males are permitted to compete in women's athletic categories based on self-declared gender identity. When women object, citing bone density, lung capacity, muscle mass distribution, testosterone exposure during male puberty, and the entire recorded history of sex differences in human athletic performance, they are told that their objection constitutes a violation of the trans athlete's safety. The word safety here means unrestricted access to a category biologically designed to exclude you. The word violence means a woman saying no. 4. Corporate DEI mandates. Employees are required to attend training sessions in which they must confess to privileges they may or may not possess, adopt linguistic frameworks they may or may not believe, and signal allegiance to ideological propositions they may or may not endorse under the explicit or implicit threat that refusal will be recorded as a safety concern and handled accordingly. The workshop is not education. It is a loyalty oath dressed in therapeutic language. 5. Media and publishing. Factual reporting on crime statistics, biological sex differences, cross-sex hormonal interventions on minors, or the demographic consequences of immigration policy is reframed as harmful, dangerous, or literal violence. The data does not matter. The source does not matter. The methodology does not matter. What matters is whether the right kind of person claims to feel unsafe, and that feeling, asserted but never demonstrated, overrides every other consideration. Hidden premises. Strip the term of its humanitarian costume, and you find a skeleton of totalitarian logic. Premise one subjective feeling is a more valid form of knowledge than objective data. This is the core epistemological claim, and it is self-refuting. If feelings are the measure of truth, then the feeling that feelings are the measure of truth is itself merely a feeling, not a truth. The claim collapses under its own weight. It is a man trying to lift himself by his own belt. Premise 2. Power is always held by the dominant group, so any challenge to a marginalized person's narrative is an act of aggression. This makes the claim unfalsifiable. If you agree, you are confirming the theory. If you disagree, your disagreement is evidence of your dominance and therefore confirms the theory. The theory eats its own criticism. It is a closed loop, a sentence that reads itself and declares itself true. This is not logic. It is a hallucination with tenure. Premise 3. Comfort is a fundamental human right that supersedes liberty, truth, and due process. No civilization in recorded history has ever survived this proposition. Comfort is a product, not a right. It is the byproduct of ordered liberty, hard work, functional institutions, and the quiet sacrifices of millions of men who built the infrastructure that makes comfort possible: the power grids, the water systems, the police forces, the fire departments, the courts, the roads, the bridges, the defense perimeters. Comfort is the residue of male sacrifice made ordinary. To declare comfort a right is to declare the sacrifice invisible and the sacrificer irrelevant. Premise 4. The sawari status is immutable and cannot be earned or lost through behavior. This is the doctrine of identity as authority, the claim that who you are, your group membership, your declared trauma, your intersectional rank, determines the validity of your statements, regardless of evidence, logic, or competence. It is the death of meritocracy. It replaces the question, is this true, with the question who is saying it and how do we feel about them. This is not justice. It is tribalism wearing a graduation gown. Premise 5. Disagreement is harm. Correction is violence. Definition is aggression. This is the anti-logos move, the inversion of the principle that reality is knowable, nameable, and shared. If naming reality becomes violence, then reality itself becomes the property of whoever has the power to define terms. And if words mean whatever the most powerful complainant says they mean, then language is no longer a tool for communication. It is a weapon for domination. The dictionary becomes a battlefield. The grammarian becomes a dissident. The grammar of the trap. Here is how the mechanism works, step by step. Redefine the word. Safety no longer means physical protection from harm. It means emotional protection from discomfort, disagreement, or factual correction. Expand the category of harm. Violence no longer requires physical force. Speech is violence. Silence is violence. Disagreement is violence. Even thought can be violence if it fails to affirm the right narrative. Shift the burden of proof. The accused must prove they did not cause harm, but harm is defined by the accuser's subjective state, which cannot be cross-examined without causing further harm. The accused is trapped in a Kafka loop. The act of defending yourself is reclassified as the act of attacking. Make the claim unfalsifiable. If you ask for evidence, you are demanding emotional labor. If you cite data, you are weaponizing colonial epistemology. If you ask for a definition, you are engaging in semantic violence. Every tool of rational inquiry is reclassified as a tool of oppression, enforced through institutional power. The claim is not won by argument. It is won by HR, by the Title IX office, by the DEI director, by the social media mob, by the publisher who drops your book, by the bank that closes your account, by the platform that removes your voice. The argument is never concluded. It is administratively settled. The comfort violence inversion. The signature move of decolonial Sawari safety is the reclassification of minor social friction or factual correction as violence, trauma, or harm. This is an equivocation. The fallacy of using one word, harm, to mean two completely different things, bodily injury and emotional discomfort. Then sliding between the meanings to smuggle moral weight from one to the other. If I tell you the sky is blue and you say that invalidates my identity as an orange sky person and that invalidation is violence, the question is not whether you feel upset. The question is whether feeling upset constitutes an injury that justifies restricting my speech, firing me from my job, or rewriting the law. The answer, in every sane civilization, is no. Offense is not injury. Discomfort is not damage. Disagreement is not aggression. If these distinctions collapse, then the word violence becomes meaningless, and when violence means everything, it means nothing, and actual violence goes unaddressed because the language has been spent on hurt feelings. This is not compassion. It is semantic theft, the stealing of a word's moral weight to inflate a political claim's authority. The Motte and Bailey of lived experience. The term's defenders use a classic Motte and Bailey strategy. The Bailey, the expansive claim, my lived experience proves structural oppression, and institutions must reshape themselves around my experience. The Motte, the defensible retreat. You can't tell me what I experienced. My experience is my own. The retreat is legitimate. No one can tell you what you felt. But the advance is illegitimate. Your feeling does not constitute evidence of a structural truth, a policy mandate, or a scientific fact. The sleight of hand is moving from the defensible Motte, my experience is real to me, to the indefensible Bailey. Therefore, my experience should override your evidence, your rights, and your reality without presenting an argument for the transition. The experience is a story. The story may be true, but a story is not a syllogism, a feeling is not a fact, and a biography is not a proof. Field note: the meeting. The following is a composite drawn from documented cases across corporate America, higher education, and government agencies. Names are invented. The mechanism is real. The scene: a Tuesday afternoon, a conference room in a mid-sized tech company. Whiteboard, stale coffee. A poster on the wall reads, "Inclusion is not a zero-sum game," in sans serif font. Present Dave, 42, senior engineer. 15 years with the company, built 3 of the 4 core systems the company sells. Jenna, 27, junior developer, 7 months with the company, referred by the DEI director. Priya, 35, HR business partner, master's degree in organizational psychology, wears a lanyard that says she, her, and a pin that says decolonize everything. Dave has reviewed Jenna's pull request. It contains a logical error in the authentication module, the kind of error that if shipped to production would expose user data. Dave has left a comment, this logic is incorrect. The token validation needs to check expiry before scope. Please revise. Jenna has screenshot the comment and sent it to HR. The meeting begins. Priya, Dave, thanks for coming in. We want to discuss a concern that was raised about your interaction with Jenna. Dave, sure, what concern? Priya, Jenna has shared that your feedback felt aggressive and dismissive. She's expressed that it created an unsafe environment for her. Dave, unsafes how? Priya, she felt that the tone of your comment was confrontational and that it undermined her sense of belonging. Dave, the comment says this logic is incorrect. It is incorrect. If we ship this, user tokens don't expire properly. I was being direct because the bug is serious. Priya, I understand, and we appreciate your technical expertise. But we also need to be mindful of how our communication impacts others, particularly colleagues from underrepresented backgrounds who may have experienced marginalization in technical spaces. Dave, are you saying I can't tell her the code is wrong? Priya, we're saying the way you deliver feedback matters. Jenna has shared that she experienced your comment as a microaggression. Dave, can you define microaggression? Priya, pause. It's a subtle, often unintentional behavior that communicates a derogatory or negative message to someone based on their group membership. Dave, which part of the logic is incorrect is derogatory toward a group? Priya, it's not about the specific words, Dave. It's about the pattern and the impact. Jenna is the only woman of color on your team when she receives harsh feedback that others don't receive. Dave, everyone on the team gets code review comments. I got 6 yesterday. I give them to everyone. That's how engineering works. Priya, and we appreciate that, but we need to consider the differential impact. Jenna's lived experience is that this feedback felt targeted and unsafe. Dave, her lived experience is wrong. The code is broken. I can show you the authentication flow. Priya, Dave, I want to be careful here. Characterizing someone's lived experience as wrong is itself a form of invalidation. We don't evaluate experiences as right or wrong. We listen and we learn. Dave, you're telling me I can't say her experience is wrong, but she can say my feedback is a microaggression. How is that not her evaluating my experience? Priya, longer pause, I think we're getting into a defensive pattern. Let's step back. What we're asking is for you to consider how your communication style affects the team's psychological safety. Dave, psychological safety, does that include the safety of the users whose data gets exposed if we ship broken auth? Priya, that's a separate concern. Dave, it's the same concern. The code is wrong. I said it's wrong. Now I'm in a meeting about my tone. Priya, what we'd like to propose is a mediated conversation where you and Jenna can share your perspectives in a facilitated space and where we can establish a shared commitment to inclusive communication norms going forward. Dave, and if I decline, Priya, we would note that in the file, Dave, what file? Priya, the interpersonal dynamics file. Dave, there's a file. Priya, there's always documentation, Dave. Dave signs the shared commitment document. He attends the mediated conversation. He apologizes not for being wrong because he wasn't wrong, but for being perceived as dismissive. He adjusts his code review style. He adds 3 positive comments before every correction. He begins every feedback session by asking about Jenna's weekend. The authentication bug ships to production. It is discovered 3 weeks later by an external security audit. The company issues a patch, a press release, and a statement about its ongoing commitment to security and inclusion. Dave is asked to lead the post-mortem. Jenna is promoted to mid-level developer. Priya is promoted to director of culture and belonging. Dave updates his LinkedIn. What the term actually does. Decolonial Sawari safety is not a description of reality. It is a mechanism for redistributing power without earning it. It replaces the question, is this true, with who is harmed by this being true, and then treats the second question as if it answered the first. It does not. Whether a claim causes harm and whether a claim is true are separate questions, and conflating them is not compassion. It is epistemological sabotage, the deliberate destruction of the mind's capacity to distinguish between what is real and what is desired. It replaces the principle that evidence determines validity with the principle that identity determines authority. Your group membership, your trauma claim, your intersectional rank, these become your credentials. Not your work, not your competence, not your logic, not your sacrifice. Your wound is your warrant, your pain is your proof, your discomfort is your domain. This is not justice, it is resentment with a vocabulary. And it works not because it is true, but because it is enforced, not by argument, but by paperwork, not by evidence, but by HR, not by a jury, but by a committee, not by a court of law, but by a court of feelings, where the verdict is determined in advance by the identity of the accuser and the silence of the accused. The counter definition. Decolonial Sawari safety counter definition. The arbitrary suspension of objective standards in favor of subjective identity claims enforced by institutional power to maintain ideological conformity, reward grievance, and punish dissent, all under the camouflage of compassion. The detonating question. If safety means no one can ever tell me I'm wrong, then isn't that just the definition of a prison, one where you are both the inmate and the warden? Or more precisely, if your safety requires my silence, and my silence enables your error, and your error harms everyone, then who exactly is being kept safe, and who is being kept dangerous? Maxims for the man, OCs. Nature is not bigotry. To name what is real is not to hate what you name. Difference is not hatred. To distinguish is to see, and to see is the first duty of the rational soul. Comfort is a product, not a right. It is the residue of sacrifice, order, and competence, not the precondition for them. Safety without truth is a cage. The safest room in any prison is solitary confinement. A claim that cannot be wrong cannot be right. Unfalsifiability is not depth. It is a locked door with no room behind it. Feelings are data, not verdicts. They tell you about the feeler. They do not tell you about the world. When words lose their meaning, power fills the gap. The man who controls the dictionary needs no army, until the men with dictionaries are dragged from their desks. Define before you obey. A question can be a sword with a clean conscience. The unexamined slogan becomes a cage. Make the claim, hold still. Ask until the mask names itself. Decolonial Sawari safety is not safety. It is the word safety stolen, gutted and worn as a skin suit by an ideology that cannot survive contact with reality and knows it. That is why it must outlaw reality. That is why it must criminalize the question. That is why it must fill out the form, schedule the meeting, note it in the file. Because the moment a man is permitted to say calmly, clearly, without apology, that is not true, and here is why the entire apparatus collapses. Not because it is refuted, but because it was never argued. It was only enforced. And enforcement, unlike truth, requires constant fuel. Your silence is that fuel. Your question is the fire extinguisher. Ask it, debunking the term. How your discomfort became their weapon. Your silence became their evidence, and your job became their offering. What the word pretends to mean. Decolonial Sawari safety arrives dressed in the vestments of compassion. It speaks the language of care, of protection, of liberation from harm. Its advocates describe a world in which certain bodies carry intersectional trauma, a perpetual wound inflicted by systems of power they neither chose nor control, and in which the simple act of existing inside a body, marked by history, constitutes a daily encounter with violence. In this framing, safety is not a luxury. It is a precondition for participation in public life. To deny someone safety is to exile them from the community. To question what they mean by safety is to commit the very violence they are asking you to stop. The term presents itself as a moral imperative with the gravity of natural law. It implies that the old definitions of safety, freedom from physical assault, from unlawful detention, from the seizure of property, were never neutral. They were colonial definitions. They were definitions authored by men who owned land, wrote statutes, and built institutions to protect their own interests while defining everyone else's suffering as irrelevant. The decolonial prefix signals a project of liberation, dismantling the inherited architecture of Western epistemology, which treats logic, evidence, and procedural fairness as universal goods, when in fact they are tools of a particular culture's dominance. To demand decolonial safety, then, is to demand that the oppressed be permitted to define reality on their own terms, free from the coercive metrics of the oppressor's worldview. This is what the word pretends to mean. It pretends to mean, we care about vulnerable people, and if you oppose us, you do not. Notice the grammar of the trick. The term embeds its conclusion inside its definition. If safety is whatever the self-declared victim says it is, then any challenge to the victim's declaration is, by definition, unsafe. The word builds a wall around itself and names every brick an act of compassion. It does not invite examination because it defines examination as aggression. It does not tolerate questions because it classifies questions as harm. Before a single argument has been exchanged, the opponent is already guilty not of being wrong, but of being dangerous. The rhetorical architecture is ancient and recognizable. It is the architecture of the sacred taboo. In pre-rational societies, certain objects, words, and spaces were set apart as too holy, too powerful, or too dangerous to be touched by ordinary hands. To approach them was to risk contamination, divine punishment, or social annihilation. The taboo did not explain itself. It did not need to. Its power lay precisely in its immunity from question. Decolonial Sowari safety operates on identical logic. It constructs a secular priesthood of trauma, ordains its clergy through the hierarchy of intersectional victimhood, and declares its doctrines untouchable, not because they are true, but because they are sacred. The word pretends to be a shield. We will see that it is a sword. What the word actually does. Strip the therapeutic vocabulary away, and decolonial Sowari safety functions as a mechanism of political control. It does not protect the vulnerable. It empowers the already powerful, those embedded inside institutional bureaucracies with the authority to define, adjudicate, and punish, to silence dissent by recategorizing it as injury. Here is how the machine works in practice. A man sits in a workplace training seminar. The facilitator presents a claim he knows to be empirically false, perhaps that women earn 77 cents for every dollar a man earns for identical work. A statistic debunked by economists across the political spectrum when controlling for hours worked, occupation, experience, and life choices. He raises his hand. He cites the Bureau of Labor Statistics. He is calm, specific, and respectful. The facilitator pauses. A silence falls over the room. Later that week, he is called into HR. A co-worker has filed a complaint. His tone made her feel unsafe. The specific content of his argument is never addressed. The data is never examined. The logic is never tested. The charge is not that he was wrong. The charge is that he made someone feel a certain way, and that feeling, under the doctrine of Sowari safety, constitutes evidence of harm sufficient to trigger institutional discipline. He is now the accused. He must prove his innocence not against a factual claim, but against an emotional one. How does a man prove his tone was not aggressive when the standard for aggression is the subjective report of the accuser? How does he defend himself against a charge that has no objective referent, no measurable threshold, and no falsifiability criterion? He cannot. That is the design. This is what decolonial Sowari safety actually does. It inverts the burden of proof. In the legal tradition of the West, a tradition built on the blood, reason, and sacrifice of men who understood that unchecked accusation is the engine of tyranny, the accuser bears the burden of demonstrating harm. The accused is presumed innocent. Evidence must be presented. Cross-examination is permitted. The standard is not whether someone felt wronged, but whether a wrong occurred. Sowari safety destroys this architecture. It replaces the standard of objective harm with the standard of subjective discomfort. It replaces evidence with assertion. It replaces cross-examination with compliance. The accuser's identity, her victim's status, her intersectional credentials, becomes the proof. The accused's identity, his membership in the presumed oppressor class, becomes the presumption of guilt. The word does not protect the vulnerable. It manufactures vulnerability as a currency of power. Consider the etymology of the invented term itself. Sowari fuses sovereign with war. A sovereign declares law within a territory. A warrior wages conflict against an enemy. The Sowari individual is both. A one-person state of exception who declares that her emotional state constitutes the law of the land and that anyone who violates it is not merely mistaken, but aggressive. An enemy combatant in the perpetual war between lived experience and objective reality. The decolonial prefix performs additional work. It invokes the moral authority of anti-imperialism, a genuine historical struggle against genuine oppression, and grafts it onto the petty grievance of a bureaucrat whose feelings were bruised by a fact. It borrows the gravity of the Nuremberg trials to prosecute a man who misgendered someone in an email. It steals the inheritance of abolition to justify firing a professor who cited biology. This is not decolonization. It is recolonization, the seizure of language, law, and institutional power by a new managerial class that rules not by consent but by accusation. What the word actually does is simple and devastating. It converts feeling into law, accusation into conviction, and dissent into violence, all while calling the process compassion. The premises hidden inside it. Every ideological term is a delivery vehicle for premises it does not state. The power of the unstated premise lies in its invisibility. What is never spoken cannot be challenged. To dismantle decolonial Sowari safety, we must excavate the assumptions buried inside it, hold them up to the light, and test each one against reason, evidence, natural law, and the lived experience of every man who has been ground beneath its machinery. Premise 1. Subjective feeling is a valid form of knowledge. The term assumes that how a person feels about a situation constitutes reliable information about what the situation is. If a woman feels unsafe, she is unsafe. If a person of color feels harmed by a statement, the statement is harmful. Feeling is treated as a species of perception, a direct apprehension of reality that requires no external validation. This premise fails on elementary logical grounds. Feelings are real. No one denies that the woman in HR genuinely felt uncomfortable, but feelings are responses to interpretations, not perceptions of fact. A man who hears a noise in the dark and feels terror is experiencing a real emotion, but the emotion does not prove a burglar is present. It proves only that his nervous system interpreted ambiguous stimuli through a filter of prior expectation. The feeling requires investigation before it can ground a conclusion about reality. The entire Western scientific tradition, the tradition that gave us the microscope, the surgical theater, the engineering schematic, and the court of law rests on the recognition that subjective experience is insufficient as a basis for public truth. Eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable. Memory is reconstructive and malleable. Emotional states distort perception. This is why we invented instruments, protocols, double-blind studies, and rules of evidence, because the unaided human mind is a biased, emotional, story-generating machine that confuses its own reactions with the structure of the world. The Sowari premise inverts this. It declares the mind's bias to be its virtue. It proclaims the emotional reaction to be more authoritative than the data. It does to epistemology what a corrupt judge does to a courtroom. It replaces the rules of evidence with the preferences of the powerful. Natural law refutation, the capacity for reason, for apprehending reality through disciplined thought rather than reactive feeling, is what distinguishes the human person from the animal. To elevate feeling above reason is to reduce the human being to a stimulus-response organism with no access to truth. It is, in classical terms, a sin against the logos, the murder of the rational soul's birthright. Premise 2. Power is always held by the dominant group. The term assumes a fixed topology of power. Men hold power over women. Whites hold power over people of color. The cis-heteropatriarchal order is a monolithic structure through which all social interaction flows. and every encounter between a member of a dominant group and a member of a marginalized group is an encounter between oppressor and oppressed. This premise is empirically false and philosophically incoherent. Power is not a substance that certain groups possess and others lack. It is a relationship that varies across contexts, institutions, and domains. A black woman who serves as a university provost exercises enormous institutional power over a white male adjunct instructor, the power to hire, fire, approve, deny, and destroy careers. A female HR director holds direct coercive authority over every male employee in her purview. A transgender activist coalition can mobilize media, corporate, and governmental pressure to ruin a man's life within 48 hours of a social media post. The fixed topology premise is not a description of reality. It is a theological claim, an article of faith in the secular religion of critical theory that cannot be questioned without triggering the accusation of heresy relabeled as fragility, bias, or bigotry. Its function is to render all institutional power wielded by designated victim groups invisible and unaccountable, while rendering all institutional power wielded by designated oppressor groups suspect and illegitimate regardless of how it was acquired or exercised. Logical refutation. If power always flows from dominant to marginalized, then no marginalized person can ever wield coercive authority over a dominant person. But this is observably false. Therefore, the premise is false. A theory that denies what everyone can see is not a theory. It is a lie-wearing academic regalia. Premise 3. Comfort is a right that supersedes liberty and truth. The term assumes that emotional comfort, freedom from psychological friction, from challenging ideas, from the experience of being disagreed with, is a human right that outranks freedom of speech, freedom of inquiry, due process, and the pursuit of truth. No civilization in recorded history has ever operated on this principle, because no civilization could survive it. Comfort is the product of order, competence, sacrifice, and the disciplined labor of men who built walls, roads, legal systems, sewer lines, electrical grids, and standing armies so that others could sleep without fear. Comfort is downstream of the very patriarchal, hierarchical, reason-based civilization that the Sowari doctrine seeks to dismantle. You cannot eat comfort. You cannot defend a border with comfort. You cannot build a bridge, try a criminal case, perform an appendectomy, or raise a child on comfort. The right to comfort, if taken seriously, would make education impossible. Learning requires the discomfort of discovering one was wrong. Make justice impossible. Justice requires hearing testimony that may distress. And make civilization itself impossible. Civilization requires the confrontation of reality, which is frequently uncomfortable. Rhetorical refutation. The safest room in any building is solitary confinement. It has no ideas, no disagreement, no friction, and no one to challenge you. It is perfectly safe. It is also perfectly sterile, perfectly static, and perfectly dead. A society that optimizes for safety above all else is already producing generations of adults who cannot tolerate a contrary opinion, cannot survive a logical argument, and cannot distinguish between being offended and being injured. This is not progress. It is infantilization dressed as compassion. Premise 4. Victim's status is immutable and grants epistemic authority. The term assumes that belonging to a designated marginalized group grants a form of knowledge, standpoint epistemology, that is inaccessible to members of dominant groups. The victim sees the system from below. The oppressor sees it from above. The below view is truer because it reveals the machinery of power that the above view conceals. This premise collapses under its own weight. First, it assumes all members of a marginalized group share the same perspective. They do not. A black conservative Christian and a black queer Marxist share a racial category but disagree about nearly everything. A woman who opposes abortion and a woman who advocates for its unrestricted availability share a sex, but occupy opposing moral universes. The standpoint premise taken seriously would require us to ask which marginalized perspective holds authority, and the answer is always the one that aligns with the ideology of the institution asking the question. Second, it grants epistemic authority without requiring epistemic competence. A person's experience of suffering does not qualify them to diagnose its causes, prescribe its remedies, or adjudicate disputes about its meaning. A man who loses his job may experience genuine suffering, but his suffering does not prove his employer was unjust. A woman who feels discriminated against may be experiencing real emotional pain, but her pain does not constitute evidence of discrimination. Experience is raw material, not analysis. Third, it creates an arms race of victimhood. If victim status grants authority, then authority accrues to those who can claim the most victimhood. The incentive structure rewards exaggeration, fabrication, and the competitive performance of suffering. We now live in a culture where privileged groups invent new marginalization categories, polyamory, demisexuality, otherkin, to access the moral authority that victimhood confers. This is not compassion, it is a status market. Socratic refutation. If victim status grants epistemic authority, then the most oppressed person in any room is always the most knowledgeable. But a person can be oppressed and ignorant. A person can be victimized and wrong. A person can suffer terribly and still draw false conclusions about the source of their suffering. So does suffering produce knowledge, or does disciplined reasoning produce knowledge? If the former, every traumatized person is a sage. If the latter, victim status is irrelevant to the validity of an argument. Which do you choose? Premise 5. Challenging a victim's narrative is an act of violence. This is the most insidious premise. It recategorizes rational disagreement as interpersonal aggression. If a woman claims she was harassed, asking for evidence is harassment. If a person of color reports a microaggression, requesting a precise definition of the term is itself a microaggression. The demand for evidence becomes evidence of the very harm being disputed. This is what logicians call a Kafka trap, a structure in which the accused's denial is interpreted as confirmation of guilt. It is unfalsifiable. It is totalitarian. It is the precise mechanism of every show trial in history, from the Spanish Inquisition to the Salem witch courts to the Soviet purges. The accused cannot win because the rules of evidence are designed to make innocence impossible to demonstrate. No civilization committed to truth, justice, or human dignity can accept this premise and survive. The Western legal tradition, Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, the presumption of innocence, the right to confront one's accuser, the requirement that the state prove its case beyond reasonable doubt was built by men who understood that unchecked accusation is the single greatest threat to human freedom. They built the architecture of due process not because they were naive about real harm, but because they knew that the alternative, a system in which accusation equals conviction, produces more injustice than it prevents. Maxim: a claim that cannot be questioned is not a truth. It is a command, and a command disguised as a truth is the definition of propaganda. The fallacies that keep it alive. Decolonial Sowari safety is not merely wrong, it is wrong in specific, identifiable, classically recognized ways. The doctrine survives not because its arguments are sound, but because its fallacies are emotionally effective and institutionally useful. Name the fallacies, and the doctrine loses its camouflage. Fallacy 1. Equivocation on safety. The word safety undergoes a bait and switch. In its traditional meaning, the meaning encoded in law, in engineering, in medicine, and in common sense, safety means freedom from physical danger, protection from assault, from toxic exposure, from structural collapse, from the initiative force. This is the moat, the defensible position. No one opposes safety in this sense. But the doctrine then shifts to a second meaning, the Bailey, in which safety means freedom from emotional discomfort, from intellectual challenge, from the presence of ideas one finds distasteful. This meaning is indefensible on its own merits, so it is smuggled in under the cover of the first. The test: ask the advocate to define safety. If they say freedom from physical harm, agree, and then ask why being told a statistic constitutes physical harm. If they say freedom from psychological harm, ask them to distinguish between psychological harm and mild annoyance. If they cannot draw the line, the word has no line, and a word without boundaries is a weapon, not a concept. Fallacy 2. Equivocation on violence. The same equivocation infects the word violence. In its legitimate sense, violence means the physical violation of a person's bodily integrity, punching, stabbing, raping, imprisoning. In the Saori lexicon, violence expands to include speech, ideas, facial expressions, silences, and the absence of enthusiasm. A lecture on biology becomes epistemic violence. A raised eyebrow becomes nonverbal aggression. The quiet decision not to applaud becomes structural harm. This is not metaphor, it is semantic theft. When violence means everything, violence means nothing. And the real victims of actual physical violence, the women raped in war zones, the men beaten in street fights, the children abused in homes, are linguistically equated with the academic who heard an opinion she disliked. The inflation of the word does not help the oppressed. It dilutes their suffering into meaninglessness. The test: if hearing a contrary opinion is violence, what word remains for being struck with a baseball bat? If all harm is equivalent, then no harm is prioritized. Is that the world you want? Fallacy 3. The Motte and Bailey of lived experience. When the advocate makes a factual claim, the wage gap proves systemic sexism, and you present counter-evidence, they retreat. You're invalidating my lived experience. Lived experience in this usage is unfalsifiable. No dataset can touch it. No logic can penetrate it. It is the moat, the castle, keep to which the advocate flees when under fire. But when the advocate advances a policy prescription, therefore we must mandate quotas, suppress speech, and fire dissenters, they cite their lived experience as proof of systemic truth. Now, the personal anecdote has been elevated to the status of structural diagnosis. This is the Bailey, the expansive territory the advocate occupies when unchallenged. The move is never acknowledged because it cannot survive acknowledgement. Either lived experience is personal and unfalsifiable, in which case it cannot ground public policy, or it is a structural claim subject to evidence, in which case it can be wrong. The advocate cannot have both. The test: is your lived experience a story about your feelings or a fact about the world? If it is a story, it deserves empathy, but not authority. If it is a fact, it can be measured, tested, and potentially refuted. Which is it? Fallacy 4. Kafka trapping. The doctrine constructs a closed logical loop in which all resistance confirms the diagnosis. If you deny being a bigot, your denial is fragility, evidence of your inability to confront your privilege. If you ask for evidence of bigotry, your request is seal lining, a form of harassment. If you cite data contradicting the accusation, your data is epistemic violence, the weaponization of colonial knowledge structures. If you remain silent, your silence is complicity. There is no exit. Every response is reclassified as a symptom. This is not argumentation. It is the grammar of the cult, a self-sealing system in which the only acceptable act is confession, and the only acceptable confession is agreement. The test: what could I possibly say or do that would convince you I am not guilty? If the answer is nothing, then you are not making an accusation, you are issuing a decree. Fallacy 5. Appeal to emotion. Argumentum ad passiones. The entire rhetorical force of Saori safety rests on the transfer of emotional intensity from the accuser to the audience. The advocate does not present a logical case, they present a suffering body. The tears, the trembling voice, the recounting of pain, these are offered as evidence, and the audience is expected to respond with sympathy rather than scrutiny. Sympathy is appropriate, but sympathy is not a truth test. A person can be genuinely suffering and genuinely wrong about the cause. A woman who weeps in HR may be experiencing real anguish and attributing it to the wrong source. To question the attribution is not to deny the anguish. It is to insist that emotion, however sincere, does not constitute a syllogism. The test: does the strength of your feeling increase the truth of your claim? If a man is furious enough, does his anger make his accusation correct? If not, why does a woman's tears make hers unimpeachable? Fallacy 6. Category error, treating identity as argument. The doctrine treats demographic membership as a logical premise. As a woman of color, my experience is offered as a complete argument whose conclusion is implicit, and therefore my position is correct. But identity is not a premise, it is a biographical fact. It may provide context for a claim. It cannot validate one. A black man's experience of racism is real context for his political views. It does not make his political views correct. A woman's experience of sexism is real context for her analysis of gender dynamics. It does not make her analysis sound. To treat identity as argument is to commit a category error of the most fundamental kind. It collapses the distinction between the speaker and the speech, between the messenger and the message, between the thermometer and the temperature. The test: if two people share your identity but disagree with your conclusion, what resolves the dispute? If identity is authority, then conflicting identities produce conflicting authorities, and the result is not truth, but tribal warfare. Is that the epistemology you want? Fallacy 7. Unfalsifiability. The core claims of Sawari safety cannot be tested against reality. Structural violence is invisible by definition. It operates through absence, through implication, through the very air we breathe. Microaggressions are defined as unconscious and unintentional, which means the accused cannot disprove them because they are not aware of committing them. Implicit bias is measured by instruments, the IAT, whose own designers acknowledge lack predictive validity for real-world behavior. A theory that cannot be falsified is not a scientific theory. It is a metaphysical commitment, a statement of faith that is immune to evidence by design. Karl Popper identified this structure in the mid-20th century as the hallmark of pseudoscience, a system that explains everything, predicts nothing, and cannot be contradicted by any observation. Astrology functions this way, so does Sawari safety. The test: what observation, if made, would cause you to abandon the doctrine? If nothing would, if no data, no counterexample, no lived experience of dissent could shake your conviction, then you are not holding a belief. You are possessed by one, the institution that benefits. Follow the power. Every ideology serves an interest. The question is not whether decolonial Sawari safety has beneficiaries. It does, but who they are, what they gain, and what they lose if the doctrine collapses. The beneficiaries are not the marginalized people in whose name the doctrine is preached. The black teenager in a failing school, the woman working 2 jobs to feed her children, the man living under a bridge after a divorce, cleaned him out. These people are not helped by a university creating a bias response team or a corporation hiring a DEI consultant at $400 an hour. Their material conditions are untouched. Their suffering is borrowed, commodified, and resold as institutional capital. The real beneficiaries are the managerial class, the administrators, consultants, trainers, compliance officers, diversity officers, Title IX coordinators, HR directors, student life deans, and policy analysts whose salaries, status, and authority depend on the perpetual existence of the problem they are hired to solve. Consider the incentives. A university diversity office that declares its campus free of bias has just eliminated the justification for its own budget. A DEI consultant who reports that the corporation has achieved equity has just fired herself. A Title IX bureaucracy that concludes the campus is safe for women has just lost its mandate. The structural incentive is not to solve problems. It is to find, manufacture, and amplify them because problems are the raw material of institutional growth. This is why the definition of harm must constantly expand. When actual discrimination declines, and by most measurable standards, it has declined dramatically over the past half-century, the doctrine must discover new forms of discrimination to justify its existence. Hence, microaggressions, a category so elastic it can include asking someone where they are from, complimenting their English, or holding a door open. Hence, stereotype threat, cultural appropriation, tone policing, and the ever-expanding taxonomy of harms that no sane legal system would recognize, but that every bureaucratic apparatus can monetize. The institution that benefits is the one that has replaced the family, the church, the guild, and the community as the primary mediator of human relationships. The corporation-state hybrid that employs the language of therapy, the authority of law, and the architecture of surveillance to regulate every interaction between human beings. In this institution, men occupy a particular and punishing position. They are the designated carriers of original sin. Their labor funds the apparatus. Their silence enables it. Their punishment demonstrates its power. The father who pays child support to a court system that stripped him of his children. the worker who pays taxes to fund a government bureaucracy that classifies him as a problem, the employee who attends mandatory training sessions where he is told his masculinity is toxic. These men are not incidental casualties of the Sowari system. They are its fuel. The institution needs men to be guilty. If men are not guilty, the institution has no purpose. If men are not dangerous, the institution has no mandate. If men are not oppressive, the institution has no reason to exist. So the institution must produce evidence of male guilt, male danger, and male oppression. Not because these things are true, but because the institution's survival depends on them being treated as true. Maxim: the parasite needs the host to be sick. If the host is healthy, the parasite starves. This is why the Sowari doctrine is unfalsifiable. An empirical doctrine could be refuted, and a refuted doctrine cannot sustain a bureaucracy. But a metaphysical doctrine, immune to evidence, can generate infinite work, infinite trainings, infinite investigations, infinite reports, infinite adjustments, infinite confessions. The machine never stops because the problem is never solved, because the problem is defined in a way that makes solution impossible. Men built the institutions that now devour them. The universities, the courts, the corporations, the legal frameworks, these were erected by men who believed in truth, merit, due process, and the pursuit of excellence. They were designed to serve a civilization of free, responsible, rational agents. They have been seized by an ideology that believes in none of those things, an ideology that treats the architecture of liberty as a machine for oppression and repurposes it as an instrument of control. The institution that benefits is the one that took your inheritance, renamed it privilege, and now charges you rent on the civilization your forefathers built. The plain English translation: enough jargon, enough therapeutic fog. Here is what decolonial Sowari safety means in the language of honest men. When the right kind of person, the kind the institution has designated as a victim, feels uncomfortable, reality is suspended. The rules of evidence no longer apply. The burden of proof shifts to you. You must demonstrate that you are not oppressive, and the standard for oppression is whatever the accuser says it is. If you present facts, the facts are recoded as harm. If you ask questions, the questions are recoded as aggression. If you defend yourself, the defense is recoded as denial. There is no argument you can make, no evidence you can present, and no tone you can adopt that will satisfy the demand, because the demand is not for your agreement, it is for your submission. Or more simply, certain people get to rewrite the rules of reality because they feel uncomfortable. If you point out the facts, you are the one being aggressive. The institution will side with them. You will lose your job, your reputation, or your voice. Not because you did anything wrong, but because someone with the right identity claimed to feel a certain way. And in the new moral order, their feeling outranks your truth. Or in the shortest possible form, your feelings don't matter. Their feelings are law. The Socratic cross-examination. No ideology survives honest questioning. The Sowari doctrine knows this, which is why it forbids questions. The Socratic method, the oldest, most disciplined, and most effective tool of Western philosophy, is its natural predator. What follows is a sequence of questions designed to be asked calmly, patiently, and relentlessly, in a meeting, in a classroom, in a courtroom, in a conversation, until the doctrine reveals its own incoherence. On the definition of safety, what do you mean by safe? Is physical safety the same as emotional comfort? If not, where do you draw the line? Can you name one form of emotional discomfort that does not constitute a safety violation? If every form of discomfort counts as unsafe, is there any situation in which a person can be made uncomfortable without a safety violation occurring? If not, then what does the word unsafe exclude? And a word that excludes nothing means nothing. Is it possible for someone to feel unsafe without being unsafe? If yes, how do we tell the difference? If no, then every feeling of unsafety is veridical, which means reality has no independent existence from the feeler's report. Have you ever felt unsafe and later discovered you were not in danger? What does that experience tell you about the reliability of the feeling as a guide to reality? On the status of lived experience. You cite your lived experience as evidence. Is your experience a fact about the world or a fact about your psychology? If it is a fact about the world, can it be measured and tested? If it can be tested, can it be proven wrong? If it cannot be proven wrong, is it evidence or is it testimony that functions as a command? Two people with the same identity can have opposite experiences. One woman says she was oppressed by the patriarchy. Another says she was protected by it. Which experience is authoritative and why? If you say both can be true, then lived experience cannot ground a universal claim about structural reality, because contradictory experiences would produce contradictory structures. If you say the one who reports oppression is more reliable, what is your criterion? Is victimhood itself the proof of perceptiveness? If so, can victimhood ever be falsely claimed? And if it cannot, then anyone who claims it must be believed, which means the system is wide open to fabrication. On the burden of proof, when someone is accused of making another person feel unsafe, who bears the burden of proof? In a criminal court, the accuser must demonstrate that harm occurred. In your system, does the accused have to demonstrate that harm did not occur? If the standard is the accuser felt harmed, can the accused disprove a feeling? How does a person prove they were not aggressive when aggression is defined by the accuser's subjective interpretation of their tone? If the accused cannot disprove the charge, is there any meaningful sense in which they are presumed innocent? If the accused is not presumed innocent, is this a system of justice or a system of accusation? What safeguards exist against false or malicious accusations? If the answer is none, why should anyone trust the system? On the category of violence, you describe certain speech as violence. What distinguishes violent speech from non-violent speech? If the distinction is the listener's emotional reaction, then any speech that causes any negative emotion qualifies as violence. Do you accept this consequence? If all negative emotional reactions count, then disagreeing with someone is violence. Correcting someone is violence. Failing to agree enthusiastically is violence. Is there any form of intellectual disagreement that you would not classify as violence? If hearing an opinion you dislike is violence, what word remains for being physically struck? Are the two equivalent? If they are equivalent, then a bruised ego and a bruised body deserve the same institutional response. Does the criminal justice system treat them the same? Should it? Why or why not? On the identity as authority claim, does your identity make your claim true, or does evidence make it true? If identity, then someone with a different identity who makes the same claim, is their claim less true? If evidence, then identity is irrelevant to the validity of the argument, and your invocation of identity is a rhetorical move, not a logical one. Can a member of a marginalized group be wrong about the causes of their own suffering? If yes, then standpoint epistemology is not infallible. If no, then every marginalized person's analysis is automatically correct, which means marginalized people who disagree with each other are all simultaneously correct, which is a logical impossibility. Who decides which marginalized voice counts as authoritative? Is it the marginalized people themselves or the institutional bureaucracy that claims to represent them? On the policy implications, if Sawari safety becomes the governing standard of your institution, what policies follow? Can anyone be fired for expressing a factual claim that contradicts someone's subjective report? Can speakers be disinvited, books be removed, curricula be rewritten, or employees be terminated solely on the basis of an unverifiable report of emotional discomfort? If the answer to any of these is yes, then Sawari safety functions as a prior restraint on speech. People will self-censor not because they are wrong, but because the cost of being accused is too high to risk. Is a society in which people self-censor out of fear of accusation a free society? If not, then Sawari safety and freedom are incompatible. Which do you choose? What happens to the pursuit of truth in an institution where truth is subordinated to comfort? On the structural incentive, the office enforcing Sawari safety, does its budget grow when it finds more violations? If so, does it have a financial incentive to expand the definition of violation? Has the definition of harm expanded over the past decade? Has the enforcement bureaucracy grown in the same period? Is this correlation meaningful? If a pharmaceutical company's revenue increased every time a new disease was discovered, would you be suspicious? What would it look like if a DEI office announced that its work was complete, that the institution had achieved justice? Would its staff celebrate, or would they fear for their jobs? The master question? Can you name a single belief, policy, or institutional action that the doctrine of Sawari safety would prohibit, that you personally would want to see prohibited on independent grounds? In other words, does the doctrine ever tell you something you don't already want to hear, or does it always confirm your prior commitments? A doctrine that only confirms what you already believe is not a test of reality, it is a mirror. The counter definition. We end where we began, with definition. To defeat a captured word, we must reclaim it. Not by seizing the word and bending it to our purposes, but by restoring it to its rightful meaning. The meaning it held before the ideologues hollowed it out and wore it as a disguise. Safety is the condition in which a person is free from the initiation of physical force, from the threat of bodily harm, and from the unlawful deprivation of life, liberty, or property. Safety is a public good secured by the rule of law, due process, competent enforcement, and the sacrificial labor of men who stand between the household and the forces that would destroy it: criminals, invaders, fire, flood, disease, and disorder. Safety is the residue of male competence made invisible by its reliability. It is not the absence of disagreement. It is the presence of order sufficient to make disagreement possible without violence. Comfort is the subjective experience of ease. It is desirable. It is pleasant. It is a product of safety, competence, prosperity, and order, never the precondition for them. Comfort is private. It cannot be mandated, because what is comfortable for one person is uncomfortable for another. A lecture hall that is comfortable for the student who wants to nap is uncomfortable for the student who wants to learn. A workplace that is comfortable for the employee who wants to coast is uncomfortable for the manager who needs results. To institutionalize comfort is to destroy the conditions that produce it, because those conditions, discipline, rigor, accountability, standards, hierarchy, and the willingness to tell people things they do not want to hear, are by nature uncomfortable. Harm is the demonstrable injury to a person's body, property, reputation, or rights, measurable, falsifiable, and subject to proof. Harm is not identical with offense. Offense is an emotional response to a stimulus. It tells us about the responder, not the stimulus. Harm requires evidence. Offense requires only a report. To equate the two is to make every listener the sovereign judge of every speaker, and to destroy the possibility of public discourse. Truth is the correspondence of a claim to reality. It is independent of the speaker's identity, the listener's feelings, and the institution's preferences. It is discovered through disciplined observation, logical inference, honest measurement, and the willingness to be wrong. It is not produced by consensus, authority, or emotional intensity. It is not invalidated by the discomfort it causes. A truth that makes you cry is still a truth. A lie that makes you feel safe is still a lie. With these definitions restored, we can now offer the counter-definition of decolonial Sawari safety. Decolonial Sawari safety is the arbitrary suspension of objective standards in favor of subjective identity claims, enforced by institutional power to maintain ideological conformity. It is the substitution of emotional report for evidence, accusation for argument, and bureaucratic decree for due process. It is not safety. It is the word safety stolen, gutted, and weaponized by an ideology that cannot survive contact with reality, and therefore must outlaw reality itself. The detonating question. If safety means no one can ever tell me I'm wrong, then isn't that just the definition of a prison cell? And if your freedom from being told you are wrong requires my silence, then who exactly is free and who is in the cage? Field Guide. 8 cards for the man who encounters the phrase in the wild, at work, in class, online, in policy documents. Recognize the move, name it, ask the question, hold your ground. Card 1, the comfort violence flip. Q, we need decolonial Sawari safety. Your factual corrections are causing harm. Hidden move equates factual disagreement with physical injury. If they feel uncomfortable hearing a fact, you have committed violence. This makes their nervous system the legal standard. Plain English translation: if I don't like what you said, you hit me. Socratic question: if discomfort equals violence, then is every teacher who corrects a student a criminal? Card 2. The lived experience shield. Q. Decolonial Sawari safety means centering lived experience. You can't invalidate that. Hidden move. Lived experience functions as an unfalsifiable fortress. They use it to demand policy changes, a factual claim about how the world works. But retreat to, you're invalidating me the moment evidence appears. Plain English translation: my feelings are my proof, and asking for evidence is the crime. Socratic question: can your lived experience be confirmed or denied by anyone else? If not, how is it different from a dream? Card 3. The sovereignty climb. Q. As a marginalized person, decolonial Sawari safety means my identity determines the rules of this space. Hidden move. Identity grants sovereign authority over language, standards, and outcomes. Your logic, credentials, and evidence are automatically invalid because of who you are, not what you said. Plain English translation: I make the rules because of who I am. You obey because of who you are. Socratic question: if your identity makes your argument true, does my identity make yours false? If not, why does identity only work one way? Card 4. The debate ban. Q. This is a decolonial Sawari safety space. Debate itself is a colonial tool of erasure. Hidden move. Preemptively forbids the only tool that could expose the argument's weakness. Declaring debate colonial is itself a debate move, an assertion that demands agreement while pretending to reject assertion. Plain English translation: you're not allowed to disagree with me, and disagreeing proves you're oppressive. Socratic question: if debate is a colonial tool, aren't you using it right now by telling me debate is wrong? Card 5. The accountability trap. Q. Decolonial Sawari safety requires accountability, and your defensiveness proves the need. Hidden move. Your denial of guilt becomes evidence of guilt. There is no innocence, no defense, no process. The accusation is the verdict. This is the Kafka trap. The harder you protest, the more fragile or colonial you appear. Plain English translation: you're guilty. Protesting your guilt makes you guiltier. Socratic question: if there is no action I can take to prove my innocence, is this justice or a religious inquisition wearing academic language? Card 6. The microaggression dragnet. Q. We practice decolonial Sawari safety by addressing microaggressions and tone. Hidden move. Microaggressions are defined so vaguely: eye contact, pauses, word choice, silence, that anyone can be accused at any time. The standard is not what you did, but how someone felt about what you did. You are punishable for crimes that are defined only after the verdict. Plain English translation: we can punish you for anything, anytime, and you won't know the rule until you've broken it. Socratic question: can you write down a complete list of microaggressions so I can avoid them? If not, how is this different from a speed trap with no speed limit? Card 7. The easy answer rejection. Q. Decolonial Sawari safety means decentering Western colonial knowledge systems like the scientific method. Hidden move. Dismisses empirical evidence as colonial when it contradicts identity claims. Biology, statistics, and measurement become tools of oppression. But this rejection is always selective. They still use phones, medicine, and infrastructure built by that same method. Plain English translation: science is colonial when it proves me wrong, but I'll keep using everything science built. Socratic question: if the scientific method is colonial, should we stop using antibiotics in airplanes? If not, why is it only colonial when it disagrees with you? Card 8. The vulnerability trump. Q. Decolonial Sawari safety demands we prioritize the most vulnerable voices above all else. Hidden move. Vulnerability becomes a competitive hierarchy. The more victim categories someone claims, the more authority they receive and the less accountable they become. Vulnerability is coins. Oppression is currency. Truth is irrelevant to the transaction. Plain English translation: whoever can claim the most suffering wins the argument, even if they're wrong. Socratic question: if the most vulnerable person is always right, what happens when two vulnerable people disagree? Who arbitrates, and by what standard? Carrying rules. Define before you obey. Ask what decolonial Sawari safety means in operational, testable terms. If they can't define it, they can't enforce it honestly. Separate harm from offense. Physical injury is harm. Emotional discomfort is part of adult life. Conflating the two is the core move. Don't let it pass. Hold the standard. If their principle can't be applied universally, including to them, it's not a principle, it's a weapon. Stay calm, stay surgical. The ideology feeds on emotional reaction. A composed question is more dangerous than a shouting match. Let the question do the work. Name the move. Once you say you're equating disagreement with violence, or you're using an unfalsifiable claim, the spell weakens. Others in the room hear it too. Refuse collective guilt. You did not build the system. You are not responsible for history's invoice. Virtue is individual, so is sin. Remember what safety actually is. Real safety is the residue of men who take risks, build systems, enforce laws, and stand between chaos and the household. It is not the absence of discomfort. It is the presence of order maintained at cost. Ask the final question. When the jargon reaches peak density, ask one thing. If your worldview requires the abolition of truth, law, biology, and due process to function, what exactly are you keeping safe? Maxim: a prison cell is perfectly safe from disagreement. That doesn't make it a home. Final test. I have watched men sit across desks in courtrooms, in HR offices, in their own kitchens, unable to name the cage tightening around them. They were handed a vocabulary engineered so that their instinct to protect what they love registers as aggression and their silence registers as guilt. Every term, safety, harm, equity, inclusion, privilege, had been hollowed out and refilled with a new charge that only fires in one direction. The mechanism is simple: redefine the word, enforce the new definition as if it were the old one, then punish the man who notices the switch. You cannot resist a spell whose grammar you have not examined. You cannot fight what you have not named. So here is the one rule I leave you with. The rule that will outlast every slogan this culture manufactures. Define the woke term before you obey it. Translated into plain English, a 12-year-old could parse. Audit who gains power the moment the definition is accepted. Then ask the detonating question, the one that turns the entire spell back on its caster. If safety means no one is ever permitted to tell you that you are wrong, then isn't that just the architecture of a prison cell? A question asked with a clean conscience is a blade that no committee, no policy, and no hashtag can rust. Carry it. Sponsored book. Shattering the Bigot label. Reclaim your rights and identity. You're tired. You've been called a bigot for questioning why fathers lose custody battles despite being sober, stable, and sane. You've been told toxic masculinity is a societal poison while watching men die building skyscrapers, fighting wars, and mining cobalt for your iPhone. You've bitten your tongue as activists pathologize male biology but still demand men pay taxes, fix broken pipes, and die first in emergencies. I get it. I was you. Then I stopped apologizing. My name is Conrad Reiche, and I spent decades watching friends get financially castrated in divorce courts, silenced by campus kangaroo tribunals, and shamed for traits evolution hardwired into them. This book isn't therapy. It's a tactical manual for men ready to reclaim power in a world that hates them. If you're a man who's sick of being told your competence is oppression, your logic is fascism, and your biology is a crime, this book is your lifeline. You'll learn how to dodge the marriage plantation's legal traps, crush feminist gaslighting with peer-reviewed biology, and build parallel systems where merit, not victim points, determine success. You'll see why 72% of young men now reject feminism, why Norway's gender quotas failed spectacularly, and how to weaponize evolutionary psychology to bypass woke censorship. This isn't for the faint-hearted. If you still believe equality means pretending men and women are interchangeable, or that male leadership is a patriarchal relic, Close this book now. Go binge Netflix's latest gender studies propaganda. For the rest, men who've had enough of funding their own demise, these pages expose the lies. You'll discover how divorce courts legally rob men. John lost his home and kids despite his ex's meth habit. Why workplaces quietly lower standards to meet diversity quotas. Female firefighters who can't carry bodies. And how to leverage strategic resilience to thrive outside gynocratic control. The data doesn't care about feelings. Male suicide rates are 3.5x higher than women's. 80% of workplace deaths are men. Sperm counts have plummeted 50% in 40 years. Meanwhile, the same system calling you toxic relies on your labor, taxes, and silence. Enough. This book arms you with forbidden science, legal loopholes, and unapologetic truths to fight back. Either you control your legacy, or you bankroll those destroying it. Choose wisely. Shattering the Bigot label, Reclaim Your Rights and Identity, written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.